Okay, welcome. My name is David, and I'm going to talk us through reflexive reading, a technique I developed with a friend of mine called Wendy. Welcome, Wendy. I've conducted a PhD, started to conduct a PhD. We upgraded this technique that we developed in order to cut through all of the language complexities that academics have come through over the years. And I'd like to represent a couple of ways of representing the reality that we're living in. Okay? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to represent this screen. And I'm going to represent me on this side of the screen and you on your side of the screen. Okay? And you are looking at me through the screen. Now it's slightly more complicated than that, of course, because on my side it's actually a camera I'm talking into. And then the camera puts it onto a hard drive, and then I'm going to manipulate it, and then I'm going to put it on a hard drive. I'm going to go through satellites in order to put it onto some kind of server on the cloud. And then the cloud is going to, when you actually put in your URL, have a look at this image. In order for that to occur, it actually has to go to DNS, which is one of these centers somewhere in the US, probably, maybe one in Europe, in order to find actually where the server is that's got the data, and then it goes to the server, and then it pings back out, goes through the satellites, and eventually gets uploaded onto your computer. Computer processes it, bang, you've got it in front of you on your screen. Right. You know all this, that. Let's call it tech thickness. Okay, this process is not happening. It's not like a window, so it's not synchronous. So it's asynchronous. Yet it is temporal. I'm actually talking in process here, and you are listening in process here. However, they are happening asynchronously. Okay, the asynchronous bit is not really relevant at this point. And so you're watching this as if you're looking through a window at a person. Hence, they call it Windows. Microsoft call it Windows. Now that's when you start thinking about this. I'm going to be talking about reflexive reading at university. And this is obviously not a medium for reading, so we're going to do a little bit of transposition. But you'll be able to do that because I'm going to try to represent reflexive reading as a thing through any representational format, including this one. Okay, so although this one departs from reading in the sense that it's asynchronous, however, this one appears kind of like more real because you can see the process of my talking. Whereas with reading, it's all purely representational text. And so, when we read something like, the cat sat on the mat. Okay, let's do it. Let's write that. The cat sat on the mat. Okay. And actually, let's have a cat sitting on a mat. Okay, as you can tell, my skills in drawing and writing are pretty abysmal. Right, that's the cat, that's the mat. Okay, can you see that? I know there's like a bright light, there are technical difficulties, let me tell you. So there's a cat sitting on the mat, and there's somebody who saw that. Okay, so let's imagine that this person was over here at some point or other, saw the cat on the mat. Right, the cat sat on the mat. Brilliant. And then somebody else reads it. Brilliant. Okay, so there's actually multiple people here going on. Okay, so that person writes it, that person reads it. Let's put a little arrow to say, well, actually, write it, and then this person reads it. Okay? Now, this person has crossed this kind of boundary. An academic text, for example, or Wendy, for example, has actually engaged me. So this is me. Wendy is a cat, by the way. And we've engaged, and then at some point or other they go on this side and they write a text. Okay? Now that would be text. But for us right now, it's actually a bit easier. I'm just talking away. There is no cat on the mat. It's just graphics and a screen and everything else. You guys are watching this here. Wendy's having a look at it and you're looking at it. Okay? So it's just this part of it, as it were. I'm on this side of the screen, it's being captured by the camera, and then you're seeing it. Okay? That's quite easy. But I want to kind of come up with a little bit of language for this, which gets a little bit confusing. Actually, no, I'm going to leave that for a bit later because that's actually new for me. I only kind of like came up with it this morning, so I want to explore what that means in relation to this. I want to get up to that point, so I have to explain what it is that I think I've worked out before I can actually apply it. But I'm going to put a little note there to indicate something to do with the writing text. We're going to be talking about the cat. We're going to be talking about cat. We're talking about cat. Square brackets, curly brackets, it might not be that obvious to you, and just cat without any quote marks, without square or curly brackets. Okay? So I'm going to remember that. I'm going to remember that because we're going to be using that when we're trying to understand which one of these realities are we talking about. This is all intentional, by the way, of course. You know, my scribbly writing so that people don't actually understand what it is that is written there. So if anybody came later and just looked at all this stuff, they'd be like, what a mess. But because you're paying attention and you see kind of scribbling up there, you're relating the sound, which you can understand, you can hear, and you're relating it to whatever that scribble is. And there's a synthesis that starts to occur. That's what I would tell the kids when I was teaching them. Also, you're more sophisticated than this. I'm doing something to do with confusion. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm playing around with different modalities of representation in order for you to just remind yourself that basically you're watching a screen and you're looking at somebody. Okay, so it's this, looking at a screen at somebody. Okay, and so you're reflexive of the condition that you're in. It's not, I'm representing something, you have to understand something I'm representing. I'm trying to represent what you actually experience at the moment. Okay, when we refer to text, you're going to be looking at text here, and then we'll be able to do a bit of reflexive reading. But what we're trying to do is actually get to the point where you're appreciating that's what's happening in all text that you read anywhere. Okay, and it's a little bit to the side with this, which is a medium of communication through video. Okay, so there's a little bit of an imaginative projection. Now, in order to talk about this little kind of problem, a new idea that I've got, we have to deal with, or we've embedded it within the notion that you are actually experiencing this, I'm actually sitting here yabbing this, and this is the screen. Now, obvious reality that is going on now. It's asynchronous, yes? My contemporary experience is happening now, your listening is happening at your moment now, and there's a correspondence of this now. That, in essence, is the reflexive condition. Okay? Reflexive reading, or in this case, reflexive watching. Now, let's stick to reflexive reading. Okay. The cat sat on the mat. Let's write that kind of clearly. Can you see that? Where's a good place to start? There. Okay. The. Not very good pen. The cat sat. Can you see that? It's going to get into the lighty bit. The cat sat on the. And you won't be able to see it. But there it is. The mat. There are two T's. Mat. I think it's mat. The cat sat on the mat. Okay. Now, here's the trick. When this is text, the cat sat on the mat. You think that when you read a piece of text, like a book or an article, do I have a book? Okay, here's a little book, here's a little product placement. Look at that. Right, it's the Inspiring Change by Failing the System. Inspiring Change by Failing the System. It's about education. Now, when you open up a book or an article, you think, wow, it's all written there. And it is. It's there. So you think all the text has been written, and so you dutifully go to the beginning, or in this case, this one's actually, you can go to different sections. And you read a section, you think, oh, there's a title, and you start reading it, and you get to the end of it and you're trying to understand what the author is talking about. It was written and you think it's finished. However, what we're attempting to do with reflexive reading is apply what Schosser calls an imaginative hermeneutic practice. Imaginative hermeneutic. So it is imaginative. You have to exercise something. Okay, it's not just like observe what is. You have to imagine something. And it's hermeneutic. It's to do with interpretation. Interpretation of what is written. Now we're using this, and he didn't know what that was really, but he thought that it was fundamental in social sciences that all academics doing social sciences need to practice this imaginative hermeneutic practice, even though he didn't really know what it was. And he came from a background of kind of therapy, and if you want to look it up, it's to do with systemic inquiry. Okay, systemic inquiry, where you're engaging another human being in therapy, for example, and you're trying to be as clean as possible and minimal as possible so that you can hear what they're saying, and then you help them express that, and then you reflect back to them, your basic therapy, without any addition on your part, okay? And you're reflecting back to them and helping them come to understand themselves and reveal things about themselves and empower themselves, okay? And if your job's done well, you're kind of like a facilitator, and they've corrected themselves, and they're improved, and whatever mental condition that they were suffering from has been alleviated, and they can get on with their lives in a more appropriately healthy way. Okay, brilliant. The problem was that the problem with that particular system for me is that it works one-on-one. It doesn't really work for large groups of people. Even with constellation work, it focuses on one individual. All right. And what I'm interested in, what this book's about actually, Inspiring Change, is multi-reflexive environments like kids in a classroom. So you can't go into the depth of one individual. You're kind of always playing around with the social dynamic. And so everybody's partaking more in the social than going down into the psychological aspects of any individual. Okay? That's what we're playing around with here. All right? We can't go too much into what I'm talking about, what my psychology is. I have to engage you in where it is that you are. But again, we can't go, I certainly can't go where you're going, because, I don't even know who you are. I know who Wendy is. I can talk about Wendy, whether she likes it or not. Of course, she doesn't like that. But, I don't even know who you are. Okay, obviously there might be people who I know that are watching this. Do you see the complexity? It starts getting complex, this reflexive stuff. So we need ways to stabilize this reflexivity. So when we're looking at a book and it is like a thing that's finished, we start reading, we think, oh, okay, right, what's he talking about? Because we think that it is finished. And as Schotter says, it's after the fact thinking. Okay, it's like somebody's thought about this, they've worked it out, there's a conclusion. So, and it's linear, and you read it linearly, nearly all text linear. Like this sentence. This is like a micro book. Okay, the cat's up, it's there, it's finished. Okay, if you approach it new, if a new person came out, oh, right, it's finished, it's a sentence, I'm going to start. Okay, kid might get that. Okay, right, I think I'd start there. All right, in other languages it might be that side, but let's start this side. What's this thing? Right, three letters. That probably means 3 sounds. Is that right? 3 sounds? This one's a bit easier. Start with that one. Cat. Bit faster. Cat. That's what kids do. Cat. In fact, I know what a cat is. The kid knows what a cat is. Brilliant. Doesn't know what that is. Oh, the cat. And they know that sound, and the cat, they know that sounds like correct. Now that's a child, that's like a baby. But the point is, the thing is finished, they're trying to understand what it is, they're looking at it and constructing meaning that is related to their language, which is related to some kind of physical reality that they actually experience quite often. Okay? Cat sat on the mat. It's a finished thing, we start. Here's the thing. That format of treating it as if it's finished, we mistake that for being the reality. Okay? And Bhaskar called this the epistemic fallacy. We think that this, or whatever it is that we think is going on, and whatever our interpretation is, or whatever we think the reader's interpretation is actual reality. It's not. This is a representation. And what we have in our minds, I'd write it in green. The cat sat on the mat. So there's a little bubble, I'm going to put over here, of a cat sitting on a mat. All right. Oh, in fact, let's put the tail on the other side to indicate that actually it's not going to be an accurate description. There's bits missing, okay, and this representational form. Okay, so this person's going, reads this, the cat sat on the mat, and is imagining this kind of like thing over here. Okay, it's not actually the cat on the mat, right? And this is a major disorder because we're not employing some kind of reflexive quality. We're just trying to use this as a representational form of the reality that we're describing. Okay? So, if this produces, in fact, I'm going to do a kind of mental image. I'm not going to confuse it too much, all right? I like the idea of confusing things to go, wait a minute, in order to jolt adults out of their customary way of thinking and understanding, including myself. And then when you kind of like let it settle, you try to let it settle according to what the actual condition is. Okay, not what you've been told, not stuff that you already know that you've been told, mostly through writing, but you can actually go, wait a minute, is this actually happening now? So, the cat sat on the mat. This is the writing, it is finished. We start reading it, this whole book. We try to understand what it is. And reflexive reading simply does this. Okay, and there's 3 parts to it. But we're just going to do the first one. Okay, and it's this, reflexive reading. Reading, the imaginative hermeneutic. The imaginative hermeneutic is, you read it at the same time, experientially speaking, as the writer. Now, if you remember, you actually saw me write this. And as I was writing this, that last word wasn't there. For me, the writer, I started there. Just where you start when you read. I wrote that word first, then I wrote that word, and then I could have stopped there. The cat sat. The cat sat. Yeah, okay, fair enough. That's it, finished. And at that moment, when you're reading the cat sat, if you can extend your imaginative hermeneutic projection, you can actually think, wait a minute, the cat sat. I'm at the same moment that the reader was, and that was no longer there. Well, no longer there, it wasn't there. And as I read it, that's when the writer wrote it. So what you're doing is you're getting it to sync with my moment of writing. Now imagine if you could do that for the entire book. Okay, so I know what I do not know. Okay, fair enough. And it starts, it is an illusion to think there is a psychological state called adult. There is only process. Right. And you're thinking, all right, okay, what's this guy talking about? And it's all been written there. However, I literally wrote that, and I was literally going, there is only process, and then I had a blank page in front of me. So what happens if, when we are reading, we actually get into sync with the writer as they are writing into a blank page? So that's a nice way of putting it, as if into a blank page. Because this is the experience of the writer. Okay, I'm going to write okay, in red. Okay, as if the page is blank. Now, actually, this bit, as if, for me, it's actually true. The writer, it is actually true. Now, of course, writers, what they do is they're actually quite often editors. Okay, you get different kinds of writers that can just write something and that's it, it's finished. And anybody that produces prolific amount of writing, like, fiction like King, or you got authors like, I don't know, Bourdieu, they're just going, and they're just writing it, very little editing, because they're producing so much. Whereas those people that take 10 years to write a book, it's because they write it and then they edit it quite often. or they're waiting for a period and then write a bit, and then wait for a period and then writing a bit. Okay, but quite a lot of writers, because of the fact that we've got so much kind of high-level skill and standard, we practice, and edit, and it's a bit like crafting a table and then polishing it, and then curving it, and then polishing, and then sanding it, and then polishing it, and making this thing absolutely beautiful. Okay, whereas obviously cat's out of the mat is plot it out there. Now, the page is blank. When I wrote this whole thing was blank. Fine, okay. But when you're looking at it, you're seeing it being filled. So the entire book, you read it in that way. And if it is written in this kind of appreciation that you're reading it at the same moment that they are writing it, I was writing it, it means I'm not really allowed to edit it. Because by editing, I'm cheating. It's like saying, cat's out on the mat. No, actually, I'm going to change that, actually. The cat's at, I was about to say in the mat. It's like, no, okay. In the tray. Oh, I should have probably done that. On the tray. Right, the tray. Look, we just check. Oh, look. Now it's coloured. Why is that darker? I don't know. Oh, God, look, a mess. Right, look at that. Tray. On the tray. Okay, the cat sat on the tray. Get rid of that, put tray. And if you saw that in the text as a finished thing, all you'd see is the cat sat on the tray. Okay? Does that matter? Well, kind of. Because when I'm talking, when we're doing something synchronously, can't change it. You can't change it. We can't change it. So when a kid goes yab, 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 and then says one of these words, that's it. It's just one of those words. Now you might be able to go back to, oh, I'm sorry. I said mat, but I meant tray. That's fine. But the point is, it was said. And there's something about our editing which we are doing way too much of for this representation of actuality. Actuality is this thing that's happening, and when we're doing all this kind of analysis and representation, so on and so forth, generally, it's just, it's not just technical thickness, there's a hell of a lot of editing and a lot of stuff on this side, all right, when we're actually compiling it. And so these texts, quite often, academically, become incredibly dense and thick and heavy, and does it actually capture this? They're attempting to capture this. Whereas we're not interested in that. We're not interested in that process. We're not really interested in whether this represents that. That's not the direction that we're interested in. So what are we interested in? Well, if we're reading this as if the page is blank, we're going, let's go back to this. It is an illusion to think there is a psychological state called adult. Now that's slightly different because you've got a memory of it. I just said it. So you're going, oh yes, I heard that, I remember that. Now that's inside you. So what I've just said is somehow they're evoking something that you've already experienced. That's different. Before, it was something you're like, what's this? I haven't heard of this before. Now you're going, oh, I've heard that before. Can you remember the next bit? There is only process. Ah yes, I remember that now. Now because adults have seen so much, and you have seen so much, Wendy has seen so much, Wendy's seen some of this, which is kind of maybe curious as to where I'm taking it or how I'm actually explaining this in this kind of slightly different way. Maybe more convoluted for Wendy, because Wendy kind of understands all this, because Wendy came up with this with me. So maybe if we invited Wendy to talk about it, say like, it's all very simple, guys. David's just made a hash of it. It's actually very simple. But I want to get to this level of complexity and depth because we are dealing with academics, okay? And so there's a potential for academics to be looking at this. So it's not an academic level sophistication in categories. It's to do with our sophistication of thought and meta level and reflexive condition. So here you are. You've listened to this before. There is only process. But we got to that point. But now we're like, okay, now we're starting to appreciate that you've already got stuff in your head. Now maybe the first time when you read this, it is an illusion to think there's a psychological state called adult. And you're like, oh, and you obviously you know what adults are. You know what psychological states are, or you might be guessing what that is. There is only process. And you're like, okay, and some people will be going, oh yeah, I kind of follow that. And other people going, what does he mean? What does he mean there's only process? What does that mean? I disagree. Okay. And there's things going on inside you on your side. That is this side. Nothing to do with this. It's to do with you and your side. Okay? And that's what we're interested in. So when we say the cat sat on the mat, we're not interested in this cat sitting on the mat. We're interested in our ideas of what we think cats are, and whether there's a mat, and whether cats are on the mat, and whether they can sit on mats, and whether it's possible, you know, existentially, epistemologically, ontologically, and so on and so forth. This is like, that's actually the cat on the mat. Is this referring to this? No, because there is no cat on the mat. Okay. So this is really all about us. This thing that I'm doing with you is all about what we think is going on. Actually, this side, okay? Or more like reflexive, okay? It's reflexive. And that's what we're interested in. We're interested in the reflexive condition, so therefore we're interested in reading this less to do with as it describes and represents a reality of any kind externally, and more to do with how does it actually represent anything that's going on in my experience here in my world, internally, and my actual experience now. You watching a screen, for example, or you reading a book. Okay, that starts getting, it's not, we don't want to get caught up into these ludicrous ideas of postmodernism and so on and so forth, which basically traps the individual in their own reflexive state. They can't communicate and understand anybody else on the planet or history and so on and so forth, and the amount of jiggery-pogery complexities of mental positioning to be able to appreciate postmodernism, all right? It's quite tricky. So what we're interested in is maintaining some kind of relationship. Okay, some kind of relation, and there's a couple of ways of doing so. So the first part of reflexive reading is you're reading as if into the blank page with the writer. Okay, so the cat sat, okay, that's fine. Now you're committing yourself to the reader. So let's say that you forget about whatever it is that you think is being written, that's popping into your head, and you really are trying to kind of follow, you know, the writer, because the writer's thinking something. You know, I was thinking something back then. What was I thinking? I don't know. I can't remember. That's why I wrote it. There's only process. Similarly, when a child leaves a school, they are not the same adult, complete with shiny confidence, expert knowledge, and set of skills. What leaves a school is a person confident enough in who they are, in others, and in their skills and capacity to learn. That sounds nice. It is not so much a skilled person that a prospective employer sees, but a person with capacity to learn. This is true whether the adult is 17 or 67. It is not so much what is known, expertise, but rather how to fit in, to make best use of knowledge and skills, and to learn what is required to do a job well. Maybe, okay. Okay. Possibly. So it's quite it's a bit of a claim, I guess. It's probably, I think it's suggesting what education should be or could be. You know, the intentionality of education to produce confident learners, okay, not disabled learners. You know, people that are underconfident and not confident about using their minds and concepts and language and maths and all this kind of stuff. But we'd rather go, I think I have some idea about language and maths, and I feel quite comfortable with the level of capacity that I've got, and I think I can learn more. Okay. So, here we are. The cat sat on the mat. You're writing at the same moment as you're reading at the same moment as the writer. Now that involves an imaginative practice because obviously it goes on and there's a whole thing there, right? So you're joining the writer in writing this. Now in order for that to occur, okay, I'm kind of making a choice between two things here. Okay, I'm going to push it just a little bit further. In order to stabilize this, what we're saying is effectively the writer is writing something, and then the reader is reading it. Okay, and there's a relationship in some form or other with the reflexive state of these. Now, I know traditionally the person's writing the cat's out on the map because they're describing the cat on the map. Oh, this person's reading this in order to understand the cat on the map. But if we say, no, the emphasis is now all on this side. Let's say all on this side, okay? I'm writing about something, I'm reflecting on it in my own experience, and you are reflecting it in your experience. And I'm trying to write it not to draw attention to my experience of actuality, but our experience of any kind of representational feedback loop, okay? Now, if you're doing something like that, and listening to, cat sat on the map, oh, cats sitting on maps, yeah, I think it's possible, blah, 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 blah. And other people are doing that. And there's multiple people watching this. Wendy, maybe one other human being. If not, maybe there's only just Wendy. Okay, but maybe there's a few other people. Okay, and those people, and here we go, we extend the imaginative hermeneutic to extend into the fact that there are multiple people. It's not just one, but there's multiple. Okay, there's multiple reading the same thing or watching the same video. Now, this inherently means that there's a relationship. There's a relationship that you're forming with the writer. I was writing this. Okay, the presence of mind of I am talking now. You are reading this at that moment. Okay, at the moment of your reading, at the same moment as the writer. Therefore, there's a relationship between you and the writer, and with all the other readers that are reading it at that moment. Because don't think about this as the chronological time period, because these are all different. Obviously, the writer wrote this, ages ago, like I wrote that book. But when you are reading it, like earlier I wrote this whole thing, but when we are reading it, the cat sat at that moment of the cat sat, we're reading it as if the page is blank, so we're really there and it's blank, and that's you. And every other reader is with you at that moment, or at that moment, or at that moment. In fact, at all moments, if you enter into this imaginative hermeneutic practice, you're reading anything at the same moment as absolutely everybody else, which happens to include the writer. And obviously, if there's a lot of people reading it, we think, well, the emphasis, because of reality and actuality, and we're going to go into detail, we think it's the importance of the author. And I say no. Because that's falling into the same kind of mistake of talking about an actuality. What's the writer talking about? I'm less interested in what the writer is talking about. It's whether it evokes aspects of my experience which are valid. And the only way you can check that is your own experience. And of course, the writer might try and say certain things that question your experience, all right? But they're not doing it by proof, and then, they're not attacking, because they can't actually, the writer can't actually change your mind, okay? When we're talking about Schotter and therapy, you can't change another person's mind, but what you can do is you can help them change their own. You can actually, caveat, you can actually change another person's mind, but it's a very aggressive, and it should only be doing very, very rarely. So if a kid's like running across the street, you go, oh, stop! And you do something, like, whoa! And they stop, okay? Because, they're more frightened of you, or they're worried about you more than whatever the thing is, the ice cream on the other side, or whatever, anything else. They're just like, whoop, and then the car goes by, okay? We can't change people's minds, but it's quite an invasive thing to do, okay? And in schools and education, we do it way too much. And we really want to minimize our invasive engagement with mind. That's what therapy, at least the gentle therapies are. So that the person comes to terms with their own mind condition, their representation of their own mind, and they improve that state. And in order to do that well, the facilitator, therapist, helps that process. So similarly, we do not want to impose, the writer does not really want to impose upon this other person, whatever it is that this person thinks about reality, owns their own reality, and that's the emphasis so far. It's been the author. Even with postmodernism, with the author being dead, it's still talking about the author. It's very little about the reader. Okay, and that's what we're interested in. We're interested in the reading experience, and we're interested in what you actually think about this. Okay, but the way I'm not interested to go right. Well, I've thought about this. What do you think? Let's have a discussion and let's have an argument about it. It's more like, can you check that this is true? Well, Yeah, okay, I can do this. I can look at this as if the page is blank. I can do that. Right. Now, if you can do that, what we're suggesting is if you practice that, and all social scientists practice this method, we open up it's a stable reflexive state where we can become conscious of the relationship we have with the author. Okay? The author is not trying to just tell me something, linearly and then have a fact at the end of it and a conclusion. Okay? They're just, well, certainly my writing, is trying to go, well, I think something or other, what do you think, how is this working, and as you're reading it, does it make sense, does it correlate to aspects of your experience, is there anything which I say which is not true, which you can't actually validate there and then. Now that's the content, okay? And we might be able to, with this method, start opening up the possibility of our social power. Because our social power is the number of people that are, for example, looking at this or reading an article. But in our current system of representation, what happens is they have this ludicrous thing called the citation count. Citation. Okay. And this little number, all right, is related to which publications the paper is printed in, and that depends on the editors, and that depends on the standing of the paper, the journal, and so you get the standing and the ratings of different journals, and that determines whether you get, universities or you're in a position in universities, highly paid or not paid, and it's something or other to do with quality. Okay, somewhere in this ludicrous process, and it's not like this, where you're watching me just talking. It's more like, this technical depth. There's like an organizational thickness that goes on there, which involves politics, involves economics, and lots of other horrible kind of like complex things, all right? We want to try and avoid that. Okay, we want to try to avoid that. But the only way we can do that is by, not the only way, there are various ways of doing it, but the way that I'm suggesting might be useful for us, okay, because, okay, welcome back. In fact, let's just pause this actually.